Hello and welcome to 2-Day Rentals. It's the month of October and I told you I was going to do something fun, super creepy, scary for Halloween since it's right around the corner, and here we are. So I figured there's nothing better to do than to grab my Batman Returns backpack, pour it out, and talk about starting lineup figures for Halloween. No? Okay, then maybe not. Maybe another time. Okay, so it's a magic bag. I can shake it up again, pour it out. And for Halloween, the month of October, nothing will get you in the mood more than talking about Smurf figures. Maybe one day. Those are actually really neat little figures. And I don't have a ton of them, but I think it'd be worth maybe doing a video someday talking about Smurf figures. Okay, last try. If this doesn't do it, we'll have to talk about something else. I'm grabbing my magic Batman Returns backpack. I'm going to pour it out, and we're going to talk about the Yolanda Super Monster figures that came out in Spain in 1992. These are quirky little bootleg figures that don't have any official license attached to them, but each one of them represents a famous monster or well-known mythological creature or something that you may have read in fiction or possibly seen in a video game. And some of them kind of skim the surface of that. It's kind of left up to your interpretation. When these came out, they were released in individual little packs, and they came with a leaflet that described what the monster was, gave it a little bit of a background. Now it's all in Spanish, so you can easily translate those, and I've seen some of those leaflets online, but the fun thing about these is I think that you can let your imagination run wild a bit. I mean, there's certainly some that are play it right on the nose, right? You know exactly what they are, but there are a few that kind of leave you guessing. Well, I see what the description is, but this actually looks like it could be a figure for this, and I think that's why these are so cool. I love bootleg figures. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I guess I've been collecting them. I know I got a lot of the bootleg Rambo figures when I was younger. If I was ever at a flea market, it was nothing to pick up one of those off-brand He-Man figures, and still today, I love to look for those things. And as a matter of fact, some of those are a lot even harder to find than actual official licensed releases because there were so few made, and it's just one of those kind of things that's a quirky part in history. But all in all, I think these are awesome, and we're going to talk about each one in order of the one that I think is maybe my least favorite all the way up to my most favorite. And again, I don't hate any of these. I don't dislike any of them. They fall right into the wheelhouse of the stuff I love. It's licensed movie, video game, sort of tie-in stuff, and especially when it's a bootleg, they can take their own liberties to kind of veer away from what you may see on screen. So let's jump right in and talk about each and every one that I actually have because, like I said, I am missing only one, and I'll mention which one that is. Alright, so at the very bottom of my list we have an ape from Planet of the Apes. Now, I love those movies, nothing wrong with that, but for me, I'm just trying to figure out where this figure falls in the same category with the rest of them. Listen, I like the detail on the figure, the orange and black of its clothing. It's actually a decent little sculpt and mold of a Planet of the Apes figure, but it just seems very out of place. Now, next up we have a pirate, and boy is it a very stereotypical. You have a wooden leg, you have a hook hand, you have a patch over the eye. But again, when talking about monsters, I'm not quite sure where it falls. If they were going for something like Captain Black from The Fog, it needed to look more zombified, and the skin needed to look a little bit more rotten. But cool pirate figure, but doesn't really fit with the theme of super monsters in my opinion. Next up we have a very bare bones, no pun intended, but intended skeleton. Now listen, it's a decent mold of a skeleton, but it's kind of uninspired. I mean, yes, great this time of year, but you can find these type of skeleton figures just about anywhere. And compared to some of the other figures in the line, it just doesn't have much going for it. I like to think of it as the skeleton that comes crashing through the ceiling at the end of House on Haunted Hill. It adds a little bit more character to it, but at the end of the day, just a run-of-the-mill skeleton. Next on my list, we have yet another skeleton, but this one has some pretty neat armor on it. Again, it's a cool figure, but just kind of plain Jane. It kind of reminds me of something from Jason and the Argonauts, or maybe just sort of a basic enemy you'd find roaming around in Elden Ring or Dark Souls. That makes it cool, but when compared to some of the others that we have in this line, it's just sort of, you know, lackluster in my opinion. This is where the list kind of turns a corner, and it's harder to separate which ones I like more than the other. Here we have a Yeti, or Abominable Snowman. Kind of looks like the Snow Beast from the movie Snow Beast from 1977. I love the detail on the paint. They added some of that gray in there to give it some texture and depth. He's got these really sort of dilated pupils with these yellow eyes and bloody jowls. Mine just so happens to be missing its right hand. I believe one of my dogs got after it some years ago. But a fun representation of the Yeti, or Abominable Snowman. And I really do like this one. But, again, still kind of plain. And here we have a very run-of-the-mill standard zombie. A good mold of a zombie. He's got the attire that he was buried in. It looks like a bit more formal attire. He's got the nice sort of zombie shuffle going on. You know, looks like he came straight from Night of the Living Dead, which is cool. I wish there was a bit more gore and goop around his mouth. Maybe he would have been a bit higher on my list, but by all concerns, a decent kind of standard zombie, but nothing super duper special. And this one's actually pretty cool, and maybe I should have bumped it up higher on my list. Here we have a mummy. Maybe not the mummy, but just a mummy. And I like that they put sort of this brown paint over its white wrappings. It makes it look really dirty, like it's been mummified for thousands of years. I like how it has some of his wrappings falling off his thigh there to add some extra detail. He's got the classic sort of mummy dragging his foot with one arm out. My only concern that maybe moves it towards the bottom of my list, or why it's not higher, is that I wish that its skin color was not green. It makes it more look like a zombie than it does a mummy. I would have preferred more of a brownish orange or something like that, but neat figure nonetheless. A very cool one here. This is a Cyclops, very Ray Harryhausen. I'm thinking like, you know, Golden Voyage of Sinbad, something kind of like that. If you were to look up what a Cyclops is supposed to look like in a mythology book, you would see a picture of this figure painted in there. I love that big eye in the center of its head. I love that it's holding a boulder above its head about to crash down on its victims or whoever is trespassing in its territory. Cool little sandals with the fur around the ankles and calves there. Really neat figure, and it's cool to see that they did something a little bit different and bring a Cyclops to the mix. Neat figure. And next up, may surprise you to see this a bit higher on my list because it falls in the category of just straightforward, kind of plain Jane, but I like this ghost figure. I don't know, there's something about its eyes that look very creepy. I like the way that it's standing. It's kind of lurking around the corner, coming at you, hovering through the fog. Super straightforward, super traditional when you think of a Halloween landscape. You gotta have a ghost in the mix, and this is a very true representation of that. I really like it. This next figure here is kind of interesting, and I guess that's why I love this line of figures, is because it could be the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think that's what it's supposed to be, but it also kind of looks like Fritz from Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein's right-hand man. I love that dark red color and the texture of his shirts. I like the ropes tied around his waist and his boots, very makeshift, something Fritz or Quasimodo would do. And I think just for the reason that this figure could kind of go both ways, you don't see a lot of Fritz or Hunchback of Notre Dame figures out there. I think that's why this one moves up to the top of my list. But yeah, really neat that you can kind of come up with your own backstory or lore for these figures. If you follow me on Twitter, you've seen some of my videos, you know I'm a huge fan of Swamp Thing. And for me, this is their representation of that. Listen, the only reason this one isn't higher is because Swamp Thing's eyes are red. And if that's what they were going for, I don't really know. His eyes should be red. And if they were, I promise you, the devil's in the details, I would have bumped him higher on my list. I love that he's got like that sort of viney moss beard. He's like the Grateful Dead Swamp Thing, like he's an older version of Swamp Thing. I like all the different colors they have to add the texture and dimension. A really neat little figure. I'm actually going to put this up with the rest of my Swamp Thing figures. So yeah, Swamp Thing is what I'm calling it. And speak of the devil, we have Lucifer himself making an appearance. And boy, talk about playing it on the nose. You know, as a kid, when you're drawing like different monsters and creatures, this is the exact representation of a devil, or the devil that you would do. He's got his pitchfork in hand. I love that his tail is kind of wrapping around his leg. He has that devilish grin, and he's looking to give you a high five, like, hey, make a bad decision. So, you know, I just think that it's a really, really neat sort of playing it right on the nose sort of representation. That red just really pops. And yeah, Cool little figure here, and that's why he made it a bit higher in my list, even though it does play it a bit straightforward. Okay, so we're getting close to my top 10, but just missing my top 10, maybe a surprise to a lot of you, is this Dracula figure. Now, I really do love this figure because it reminds me so much of Hammer Horror Dracula and Christopher Lee's representation of Dracula. He's got the white walls, those bloodshot red eyes, the really cool blood red cape. I love the purple detail on his vest. This one's just really neat because it plays it so closely to the Hammer Horror version of Dracula. And they didn't go the route of Universal. They did something a little bit different, and I really like this one. He's not in my top 10. He's number 11, but for good reason, and I'll get into that when I talk about my next figure. Number 10 on my list is the Phantom of the Opera. As a kid, I was kind of obsessed with Phantom of the Opera. I love the old classic film, and I think it's a kind of a creepy story. I love the white mask. I love everything about it, and you just don't see a lot of Phantom figures. And this one's interesting. To me, it looks like it kind of has a mullet, so it's like their 80s version of that. He's got his nice tuxedo on. Wish that his bow tie was black, split in atoms, but I like how he's kind of clutching his mask. Good detail on the face, actually, for a bootleg figure. It's got that purplish and kind of red scarring and one bloodshot red eye. I moved Phantom a bit higher on my list just to show him some love, because I just don't think he gets enough, and a very cool little figure. Number 9, we have a werewolf. Maybe not the werewolf as we're used to seeing it, but they kind of did a little something different with it. I like the fact that he's like ripping off his shirt. The face mold's a little, I don't know, it's okay. It's a little suspect, but I do love the eyes. They're red with a yellow pupil, making him look really menacing, really neat. And yeah, he almost kind of reminds me of Saberwolf from Killer Instinct as well. But he doesn't obviously have the pointy ears. But a neat figure. Maybe in hindsight I could have bumped him down a little bit on my list. But he's definitely in my top 10 at number 9. And I like what they did with him. It's some neat detail with the paint, with the fur as well. So yeah, werewolf at number 9. All right, at number 8 in my top 10, it's Jekyll and Hyde in one figure. How cool is this? You got a mid-transformation Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde here, and I love that they did this. It's a cool figure. My only complaint maybe is that I wish that his vest was maybe a different color, and the jacket, I don't know, the pants and the jacket all kind of meld to bleed together as kind of a monotone look, but I just love that you got a 2-for-1 Jekyll and Hyde figure, sort of mid-transformation. Cheers, Jekyll, to your transformation, or Mr. Hyde, however you want to play him. But neat figure, and another one that I don't think gets a lot of love. You don't see a lot of Jekyll and Hyde figures, especially all in one little figure. Alrighty, it's 7, lucky number 7. We have, because we're so lucky to have this figure. It's Freddy Krueger, and you know, look, the face sculpt in this figure ain't great, but they added some detail with some purple painting over it to kind of give it some texture and some goopiness. Listen, this ain't your average Freddy. He's got not 1 but 2 knife gloves, and not 8 but 10 knife fingers, because he's got knives on his thumbs. Maybe it was a copyright thing. Maybe they thought since this was playing it really close to how Freddy looks on the big screen, that's why they had to do that. But kind of an outlier, but in a different way. I mean, he's not like the Planet of the Apes, where it's like, what are you doing here? He definitely fits in, but so far, a lot of these monsters have been very classic sort of monsters, or folklore, or mythology. This is the only sort of modern horror that we have in this line, and I'm glad we do. It just screams 80s bootleg, 80s, 90s bootleg, and yeah, it's a cool one. And if you're a Freddy collector, I definitely suggest maybe picking one of these up for your collections, just because it's a talking piece, and one that maybe not a lot of people have. And just barely missing my top 5 is Frankenstein. Frankenstein's monster, whichever you want to call it. To me, there's not a wrong one there. But I like, again, that they played it closer to the Universal version of Frankenstein. I think that's my favorite Frankenstein look. And, you know, he's got it all. He's got the stitched up wrist, the stitches on his head where the abnormal brain was placed, that nice green sort of skin It even kind of has a matte sort of look to it where the rest of the figure is shiny, but I love the big broad shoulders. I love that his coat and his vest and his pants are all different colors, giving it a lot of texture and sort of dimension. He's got the big old Frankenstein boots, and his hands are in what I think is a pretty traditional Frankenstein pose where the palms are out and they're off to his side. Love me some Frankenstein. He's my favorite of the Universal monsters, and I really do like what they did with this one. Very classic. So we've made it to my top 5, and I know that I mentioned before that I have 23 of the 24 figures that came out for this quirky little bootleg line. The only one that I'm missing, or the only one that I don't have, is Death, and it's a cool figure. He's got a black sort of hooded robe on with a scythe and a skull face. I have a tattoo kind of similar to that. But I knew that it wasn't coming with this set. I read that in the description when I bought them. If anyone out there watching this has a spare Death just sitting around that they want to hand over to me from this line, I'd be more than willing to take your donation. Where would I rank that one if I did have it? I think he'd be in my top 10. You know, maybe just outside of the top 10, but it's a cool figure. I don't have it, so I don't really have a place to rank it, not having it physically here to kind of look at it and get my hands on. But before we get into the top 5, I just thought I would mention that one because I know that I said that it's not a complete set. So if you're wondering where Death is, if you know anything about this line, well, sadly, it's just not one that I have. At number 5 for me, I'm calling this one Dracula's Daughter because 1, I love that movie, and 2, I just don't think there's enough female vampire figures out there. And you know, she's posed really cool. She has one hand back and one hand kind of forward in a very traditional sort of gothic horror pose. She could also play really well if you're looking for that hammer horror sort of idea. I could definitely see that, but Dracula's Daughter, or Daughter of Dracula, sorry, I'm going to get that confused, but like I said, I love that movie, and I think that this figure kind of falls right into that wheelhouse. She's a neat one. She has her fangs out. And like I said, I like how she's posed with those gray hair streaks coming off the side as well. Really neat one, and that's why she made my top 5. Number 4, and honestly, this one could have easily been a little bit higher. It could have been number 1, The Fly. And let me tell you, I love The Fly, a movie anthology. There's a lot of good films in there. I really love the version with, obviously, Jeff Goldblum. This figure is so cool. There's not a lot of The Fly merch like this out there, and the fact that they decided to do this is really awesome. Again, it's sort of a mid-transformation. He's sort of busting out of his leisure chute there, turning into the Fly. He's got the antennas on top. They did a really neat job on the eyes, giving that crisscross sort of pattern with some green paint. His little arms coming out there, and you can see his wing bursting out the back of his jacket. Man, it's cool, and like I said, there's just not enough Fly merchandise like this, and I actually think this will look really cool standing next to my box set of the Fly. Number 3, the Executioner. And look, this plays right into some very cool gothic horror, some medieval horror, maybe a character you fought in Dark Souls or Elden Ring. Man, this figure's awesome, and one of the things I really love about it is how he's gripping his poor victim's head just by the hair and saying, "Ye got what ye deserved," type thing. And there's some blood on the Executioner's axe, which he's wielding in his hand. It's huge. He's got the traditional Executioner's hood on. Man, this one's just really neat, and for all those reasons, that's why it made my top 3. Just something really different they did here to add to the mix of this really quirky little figure line. Number 2, the Witch. I mean, look, they really kind of thought about this one because they didn't go the traditional route of green skin and black witch's hat. They did something a little bit different. It's, you know, sort of the flesh tone skin color and these yellow eyes with red pupils, and she's got this really large staff. She doesn't have a broom like a traditional witch. This purple cape with the white hair billowing out, and the detail on her skin, like she's been in the woods hunting for things for potions or spells, and she's just cool, man. And I absolutely love this one. Very easily could have been my number 1, but there's one more that kind of trumps this one. I just really love it, and I think that it's cool that they did something different than a traditional witch. Number one, we have the man, the myth, the mystery, the legend, Jack the Ripper. Look, I mean, this figure's number one because they bring some real-life true crime horror into the mix. You don't see a lot of Jack the Ripper figures out there, and this figure's just really neat. He's got those black pupils in his eye like he's pure evil. He's got his little medical bag full of torture and murder devices at his disposal, while in the other hand, wielding a bloody knife. It looks like he's in mid-stab of a victim. I mean, look, Jack the Ripper, we've heard the story, we know the lore, they never caught this guy. You know, he's for all accounts, still out there. I doubt it, but look, I just think it's neat that they chose to do a figure like this representing some real-life horror. I mean, he even got the black top hat to go with it. You know, he's one of the reasons why I wanted to get this line, because I had read about these, I saw these, and he just looks so cool. And so yeah, he's the top of my list. He has been since I got these figures, and I think it's just really neat that, you know, much like the outliers we have in this line, Planet of the Apes, that's kind of odd. A pirate, how does that fit in? This one's an outlier in the sense that it borderlines in true real life true crime and real horror. So definitely spooky, definitely neat to put out on your Halloween spirit or mood table to decorate with, or year round. You know, set him up next to your DVD collection, and he'll look great up there. Okay, so that wraps it up for this video of the Yolanda Super Monster bootleg figures from 1992, only released in Spain. They're a bit kind of hard to come by, but if you dig around, I'm sure you'll have no problem picking out your favorites and add to your collection. Do you have this line? If you do, where does your list compare to mine? What are some of your favorites? Are you thinking about picking it up? Comment down below, let me know what you think. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing here. I do all sorts of stuff like this. If it's movies, video games, some music from time to time, man, I love talking about it here and sharing it with you. And so, it's like I always say at the end of my videos, be kind as we rewind and fast forward through time. Thank you so much for stopping by 2 Day Rentals.